Welcome back to our course and a module we're calling Bioinformatics Introduction. Bioinformatics is a big subject which you can spend an entire career on, and it's obvious we can't cover it in any depth, but I think it's important that we introduce the topic, and I think we can do so and explain why it is so relevant to modern medicine, health sciences, drug discovery, and why data science is so important for bioinformatics. Modern bioinformatics very much dates from the discoveries concerning the structure and function of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, which really revolutionized biology. And these were the work of Watson, Crick, Wilkins, and Franklin, and others, but predominantly, or most famously them, in the early 1950s. And the discovery can be summarized somewhat like this, that our DNA is structured as a double helix with complementary strands, and the backbone of each strand is a polysaccharide, which means a polymer of sugars connected to these base pairs, where each base can be one of four. So the code essentially has four possible letters, A, T, G, C, standing for adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Where in RNA, instead of thymine, you have uracil. So that becomes the language, essentially, of the genetic code. DNA is the informatics basis of heredity, and that's fairly well known, but also physiology, meaning life itself, all of the life processes. So the central dogma concerns the flow of information. Yes, matter is involved, molecules, but importantly, it is the information, that genetic code which is passed from generation to generation and which governs life. The code of life is therefore software. It's a very interesting and maybe provocative way of looking at it. Briefly put, the central dogma of molecular biology states that information flows from DNA, the coded genetic material, to RNA through a process we call transcription. So the information is transcribed. And then from the RNA, the messenger RNA, mRNA, that information is translated into proteins. In other words, the RNA directs the synthesis of proteins in the ribosomes. So it concerns the flow of information. It's unidirectional, according to the dogma. But there are exceptions to this rule, which are now known, and I encourage you to look into those. But it is still the case that this central feature of genomics and biology is explanatory for a great deal of physiology. It's important for us to understand the basic terms of bioinformatics. Of course, in new fields, new terms are being created all the time, and it can be somewhat confusing, but I'm offering these as some of the most basic and important. Bioinformatics itself may be a little bit deceptive. Yes, it is the science of collecting and analyzing complex biological data, such as genetic codes, but I would emphasize that the word connotes, that is, implies that genomic and proteomic data is being considered more than other kinds of biological data. A gene is a unit of heredity, and this word certainly predates the word bioinformatics. Normally will mean a section of DNA which is expressed as a molecular gene product, typically a protein, although there are other definitions which I invite you to investigate. A genotype is a genetic pattern. A genome refers to the full genetic code of an organism. Proteome, the full protein set of an organism, which we know is closely related to the genome through the central dogma. Genomics, therefore, is the study of genomes and their interrelationships, including cross-species. And of course, even if we weren't concerned with other species for their own sake, they can tell us a lot about ours, and that's because we're all related. Proteomics, the study of proteomes and their interrelationships, including cross-species. And phenotype, which is an observable physical trait. And obviously, when it comes to disease and medicine, these are the features that we're seeking to cure or modify. And so we are very interested in genotype-phenotype relationships. I really like this phrase in this book titled Nature's Robots. It emphasizes the fact of how important proteins are, how they behave in programmed ways. They're very reactive and do so much. In fact, to put it succinctly, proteins govern all physiological functions. Some examples. Actin and myosin are the proteins in your muscles, so they provide motor ability. Lipase and amylase are digestive enzymes. Hemoglobin is responsible for oxygen transport, of course, and the protein depicted in cartoon form to the bottom right is hemoglobin. Rhodopsin is a light receptor in your retina. Gusducin, taste receptor. Antibodies are proteins and obviously are part of your immune system. Proteins interact with one another in protein-protein networks and regulate one another. Proteins form a highly connected biological network of robots. So much of what we have in terms of data resources now are thanks to the Human Genome Project and its many offspring. So we need to talk about it a little. Human Genome Project, kind of a big deal. HGP, $3 billion, 1990 through 2003. Produced a fully sequenced genome with some asterisks, which I invite you to investigate. What else did we find out? Identified how many human genes there are, which it turns out number around 20,000. Before the HGP, no one knew. The estimates varied widely. Variations in the genome, single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs, and their disease associations. Cross-species associations, what are called homologous and orthologous proteins and genes. The ENCODE project, which means Encyclopedia of DNA Elements, and in particular, we're interested in functional DNA elements. NHGRI, the National Human Genome Research Institute, is the NIH institute which has been the offspring of the Human Genome Project. And as I mentioned, many, many data sets. We'll now take a quick look at 4 examples of bioinformatics data sets, some prominent data resources. First, a genomic data example called Gene Ontology. Gene Ontology is a collaborative effort. It relates to multiple species. It is an ontology, meaning a conceptual model of this field and specific instances which are annotated by experts for genes. In this example, we're looking at a gene ontology page after a search for a gene called BRCA1, which is named because of its association with breast cancer. And it is giving us some results which relate to multiple species, including Bos taurus, which is cow, Felis catus, a cat, and some monkey, and there are Homo sapiens in there as well. Another very important and valuable resource, OMIM, Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man. It was founded and is maintained at Johns Hopkins University, and its scope has expanded quite a bit thanks to the Human Genome Project, with which it collaborates closely. Here's the OMIM page for our same BRCA1 gene. You can see some of the links and bioinformatic areas, important thing to note is just how interlinked so many of these resources are. GEO, the Gene Expression Omnibus, is a public repository for data sets or gene expression data. So experiments which are carried out throughout the world are archived at GEO and available for searching. Gene expression studies typically look at gene expression levels in one tissue relative to, say, normal tissue. So in this case, in this example, the analysis is brain tissue, and in particular brain cancer tissue. And even though this was from a search for the BRCA1 gene, it's also bringing out other genes that are relevant, which highlights the interrelatedness of genomic features. The fourth data resource example is Unipro, which is a proteomic data example, but as we understand from the central dogma and the flow of information from genes to proteins, although it's a proteomic resource, very closely related to genes. In fact, in many cases, we use gene names and genes to refer to both a gene and its expressed protein. So, for example, in this Unipro results page, we did the same search for BRCA1, and although this is a protein data resource, we see the gene name, but also the protein name, and there is a very close correspondence, in many cases a one-to-one correspondence. So what are the take-home messages from our Bioinformatics Introduction lesson? Bioinformatics concerns the structure and function of biomolecules, DNA, RNA, and proteins. DNA is the basis of heredity, but also physiology, meaning life throughout the lifespan. The central dogma concerns the flow of information. Very important. Yes, there's matter involved in molecules, but it's the information which is essential. The code of life is software. In a funny sense, bioinformatics is like hacking a big program that was incredibly written over millions of years. Bioinformatics involves big data and very big data. We can learn about life, aka physiology, and disease, aka pathology, from bioinformatics. And so data science is very applicable to bioinformatics. Until next time.